in America, a guy named Zbigniew Brzezinski, who created this concept called the arc of crisis. And what it is this idea that you propagate and help support Orthodox religion in the borders between Afghanistan and Russia. The idea was to take from, basically to create a group of rebel fighters out of the worst criminals from the worst neighborhoods of Afghanistan and ultra-religious people, and to pump up the religious fervor in those areas, basically to make them motivated and make them be huge pains in the asses to Russia. Because then again, it's back to what we're doing now, which is fighting against a concept. It becomes that the Russians become infringing on the Afghani lifestyle, which involves religion heavily.
Well, I mean, no more than places in Oklahoma involve religion. They really just prey on the people who are extremely poor. And wherever there's poverty, there's a lot of room for you to put a weapon in somebody's hand and convince them to use it and aim in the right direction.
Absolutely. So while we did aid Afghanistan in creating Russia's Vietnam, we, as America is wont to do, especially in the Middle East, left the country in complete and total shambles. And it's Charlie Wilson, the man that was effectively in charge of the operation, who Tom Hanks played in a wonderful little film called Charlie Wilson's War.
A little bit lighthearted, I would say, for the subject matter.
A little too lighthearted, yeah. He said, these things happened. They were glorious, and they changed the world, and then we fucked up the end game.
Right. And of course, I'm sure you'll get into creating the vacuum.
Well, that's what happened, is that the ensuing power vacuum after we left was filled by the Taliban, who were supported by Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden militarily, and were funded financially by the Saudi Arabians. Right. So now you have the Saudis' tendrils firmly planted in Afghanistan, both militarily and financially.
So we have
because we have two things, right? The guys that filled this up, the Mujahideen, right, which are a group of these basically street toughs and religious nuts that end up forming the Taliban and all these people that started taking over Afghanistan. And but they were sitting on a slush fund of billions of dollars that the U.S. and Afghanistan were, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia were helping fund the entire revolution, right? Right. And basically, the U.S. would send money and weapons, and Saudi Arabia would match it dollar for dollar and include guys to go in and help set up their whole fucking army.
Yeah.
We made a delicious soup of fighters that fight. What is it? What I forgot what the term is. It's like non-unilateral fighting. It's that idea of true guerrilla warfare. You can't find them. They're picking you off one by one. They're blowing you up where you don't know where they are. They're setting booby traps. They're stealing your weapons. They're doing all this stuff. We made these guys really good.
Yeah, I mean, they're a train. But anyway, so that's exactly what happened in Iraq right now. Obviously, went in, pull out, ISIS is created. It's exactly what occurs. And, for the U.S., you could argue that it wasn't necessarily a bad decision. The Russians dissolved because of it.
Yeah, exactly. It was a calculated risk, and boy, did we calculate wrong.
And in conspiratorial thought, if we also want to say what a great bookmark to set for down the line to have a permanent villain. If you want to, no matter what, I think a good reason to leave, and when the Taliban starts getting set up, they can be like, okay, let's bookmark that as our future villain in the story. Boom, we got him. Boom, we got him. It's very easy, because now we're starting to look at being like, so if we saw the pattern with the creation of Taliban and what Al-Qaeda would eventually become in Afghanistan, and then the same shit happened with ISIS, it's got to be almost like we want it to happen, right?
The bubble's just like the housing market bubble, or I think there's going to be a university bubble bursting soon. They just go to different places. So Yemen right now, where we're currently in our proxy war, as soon as the U.S. stops backing the group of people fighting the Houthis in there, the exact same thing is going to occur. There's going to be a whole series of unrest, and the next tribal group will come in and win. I mean, whoever is the next president, guaranteed we go in, we're going to get rid of ISIS, and it'll just move to a different country where we currently are festering it with the proxy war in Yemen. We're always 10 years ahead.
My question is if we fight the Houthis next year, Do the blowfish follow?
Yes, of course.
So you're asking, okay, the Saudis are now in Afghanistan. They've now got a lot of money invested in Afghanistan.
But Marcus, that's great news because they're our allies, right?
Oh.
And they're always helping us out. They got our back over there.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, they are the number one buyer of American arms, of defense arms. They are the number one. Nobody in the world buys as many arms from America and American countries as Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, there must have been a bit of a bugaboo in the communications because 15 of the 19 hijackers on September 11th were Saudi Arabian.
But Marcus, that doesn't work out because they're our allies. And I'm confused about that. And I don't think that that's real or right.
Oh, you don't? Well, let's listen to some of the connections here. The United States has had private business ties and government contracts with Saudi Arabia since 1933. Like a lot of other countries in the Middle East, the U.S. did absolutely nothing when this country started to become an Islamic radical state that it is today, and indeed, of course, encouraged it, as Henry, you were talking about earlier. And you ask, why? Well, in theory, a dictator is a lot easier to influence and control and make deals with than a democratically elected government. And when you're done with them, like, say, for example, Saddam Hussein, you can just throw them away.
Right. Absolutely. You make little perfect villains for the future, and really all you have to do to keep a dictator happy is to get a jeweler to make him a nice little scepter.
It is honestly true. But, you know, that's what's so interesting. We talked about it with Saman Arbabi on top at length. 1933, Saudi is like a brand new country. So this dude, Saud, they're going through the desert. He has no idea what the hell is happening, and he's just like, pray to God I can stop soon so people stop asking me where we're going, like a proverbial children yelling at the back seat when you're on your way to Disney World. Yeah. You know, when are we going to stop? I have to go to the bathroom. It's like, shut up. So they finally stop, and just random luck.
Yeah.
They step on the biggest oil reserve in the world.
Yes. They literally probably were digging a hole to take a shit in the desert.
Honestly, swear to God.
And a squirting in the asshole with oil.
Yeah, and
then it's become like the Beverly Hillbillies.
They are.
Like, where?
You look at all these royal families are the Beverly Hillbillies. The Un, the Il dynasty, the Kim dynasty. I mean, they're all morons.
Yeah, they absolutely are, and that's how it got out of control with Saudi Arabia.
Was Osama bin Laden's mother on a rocking chair tied to the top of the car?
Probably.
Driving through the desert, like with the shotgun.
Well, that's unfortunately what happened is that Saudi Arabia did come upon some of the most rich oil reserves in the entire world. They're too powerful for the United States to control anymore.
Totally.
They're not controlled. They're not influenced. They are a quote-unquote ally.
And when everyone talks about oil, they often just talk about using it in cars, lawnmowers, things like that. Every one of your Lunchables, every single plastic that we touch, everything is created from oil. It literally created. America does not exist without Saudi Arabia's oil.
Yeah, petroleum.
Petroleum.
That is the biggest thing. People think about oil like exactly. It's not just cars, but everything is made from petroleum.
I can only think of Lunchables.
Yeah, why is it? Okay, yeah, I want to point that out right there. Is that Ben? There are literally
everything,
billions of things that you could have named there.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that came to your mind was Lunchables.
Marcus, you know that what Ben likes most is fake hair. Right?
Fake.
And what Ben likes second most is a big old butt. And the third thing that he likes most is a shirt in long sizes.
Oh yes, I have to, of course.
So now, the 9/11 Commission, which we didn't really talk about. And
Boo! Boo! I want to make a Raz. Can we get Raz noises every single time we say the 9/11 Commission?
Well, the 9/11 Commission, I can see both sides on this. I can see on one side that, yes, they did hide some things, but they were also stonewalled at every fucking point. Every time they tried to ask, they were completely stonewalled, and many of their questions were never actually answered.
I also found really interesting in my research, there was also a commission investigating Pearl Harbor that had very similar connections to, of course, 9/11 because of the outcome of both, right? It's very interesting. It's a weird part of like conspiracy history that I think is kind of overlooked a little bit. Where if you go into, there were people just like it was a different style of commission, because you know what I mean. Like back in the day, they could yell at the president, where now everyone has to like not do that anymore. It's like about propriety, where they were like, you killed our boys, good sir. You ruined the skies of Hawaii, good sir. You know, it's like just very intense conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, exactly.
But, you know, it's not. The funny thing is, people think about these commissions as if they're independent, you know, entities. These are all part of the government. I mean, it's like if the New England Patriots, they had Deflategate happen with Tom Brady, and if Bill Belichick was like, I will investigate, I will get to the bottom of it. So there is no real such thing as transparency, and that's why, of course, they were blocked everywhere they tried to go, because at the end of the day, they also still want to have a job.
It's like when you work in an office and you get together a group of people that are all going to decide what's the field trip for the summer.
Right.
So the 9/11 Commission, of course, they were formed to investigate the attacks on mostly the terroristic aspects, on who is responsible for these attacks. The 9/11 Commission report has 28 pages missing from the final release, 28 redacted pages. And this guy, Senator Bob Graham, he said that the evidence, quote, points a very strong finger at Saudi Arabia as the principal financier of the 9/11 hijackers. And the reason why I find this very interesting, why he's just not saying it, is because the only time he trots this out is when Saudi and U.S. relations are strained.
Right.
You know, when they're strained and they're like, and Saudi Arabia's like, oh, I don't think we want to do what America wants to do anymore. He goes, so what about those 28 pages, huh?
Right. And they treat these 28 pages like a holy grail. It's very difficult to get security clearance enough to go and see it. And then, of course, when you do go, you cannot take pictures. You can't do anything. You can't take them out of a room. You're heavily monitored with armed guards. And they walk out of there, and it does look as if they have just seen an epiphany. The first time that this guy spoke, his eyes were wide as if he just took a bunch of acid. And it's just like, birds or dogs, if you think about how brains are. And I'm like, I have no idea what that means. But, you know, so it's very interesting how sacred these documents have become.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you also want to look at the minutes that were cut out of Richard Nixon's, all of those recordings and all this stuff. Every single time something is redacted means that our government is doing a lot of footwork to make sure that the people don't know what's going on. Because to have something be that obviously out in the open and be like, and this is stuff that we don't talk about, means that it's unbelievable, because it would shatter the global relationship between Saudi Arabia and America, even though we're pointing that big fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger finger at them whenever we want. It's, I don't know.
Although with the decline of oil prices and with the they're running out of oil, Saudi Arabia, we'll find out very quickly in the next few decades how much we really like them as people. I guarantee you.
Yeah, Saudi.
Okay, I know. Yes, we've run out of oil, but what we do have are these warehouses full of pet rocks. Oh, I know that you like them, huh? You put googly eyes on a rock. It's now animal.
I kind of do like that.
Another thing to think about with this is that there was a 2005 CIA report that the Saudi government themselves had nothing to do with the attacks, but three paragraphs of redacted information could point to rogue elements within the government having direct involvement. That is something that we will definitely cover later on the American side. Rogue elements within the government.
It sounds like a good old-fashioned Cheney sleepover.
He
loves to have them, and you know what? His mom will let you watch as many R-rated movies as you guys can watch until you fall asleep.
She will? Even the Lost Boys?
Never the Lost Boys!
Oh, God damn it.
You know there's a Kiefer Sutherland band in this home.
That's not right. But I do want to say, I want to point out, Nixon's, the things they redacted from that was just a whole series of phlegm sounds. It sounded like a man eating an oyster, and he said, this is my legacy. Can you get rid of it? Yeah.
And him going like, okay, now what is the meanest way I can say the word kike? Let me just tell me, or is it cry? What sounds the meanest? Listen to me, Henry.
We could talk about Nixon forever. We'll talk about it.
We really could. Yeah. Again, with the big conspiracy theories, the other ones, okay, so the hijackers, they were not on the planes, their names aren't on the manifests, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff is very easily explained if you spend 10 minutes on a fucking Google search. It's all very easily
What
explained.
did you Google search, though, so people can do that?
Just Google search hijackers plane manifests, and it will explain to you why they say, okay, because a lot of conspiracy thought, okay, so what happened with the passenger manifest? They say when the American Airlines first released them, there were no Arab sounding names on them, but
yeah, because they're not going to go with their Arab names. They're going to go as, yes, my name is Bill Sanderson. Yes, you can see right here on my ID. It says Bill Sanderson.
Well, the problem with that is that, and of course, everyone is going to fucking go nuts over this, but airlines, they have a strict policy of not releasing names until next of kin has been notified. You see it every single time, all of this stuff. Every time there's an aircraft that crashes, they don't release the names of every single person on board. They release the names of everybody that is pretty much everyone that's been contacted. So whether these names are Arabic or not, they're still not going to release these names. And then later on, they did release these names. But of course, conspiracy theorists say, well, they could have easily added those names afterwards. They could have easily done that. It's like, well, then why didn't they fucking do it in the first place? That's also another thing about conspiracy thought that is very annoying to deal with, is the goalposts are constantly moving.
Right. And then I love the conspiracy thought of, like, how is it so easy for them to board the planes with the
box cutters,
with the box cutters? And I always like to say it was before 9/11. So it was just like they had 20 more minutes of freedom where you could still get on a board with on a plane with a box cutter, and they took it.
But they should have known that something was going to change when they were going, when they were, going through the security measures, and all the guys were like, all this shit's going to change in like fucking 24 hours, bro.
What do you think?
All your jobs are going to become much more of a pain in the ass, huh? I mean, I'm just saying, I got the feeling, huh? So tell me, have you heard of Rosie O'Donnell? She's big.
What do you think?
So funny. Anyways, got to get on this plane.
I didn't understand.
I'm going to fly it into the World Trade Center. I'm joking, of course. Not joking. I'm joking. Not joking.
Great Rosie O'Donnell joke that guy was telling. God, I love working here.
It was really weird how he opened up that bag of chips with the edge of his shoes.
There were also other claims that these people were not religious extremists whatsoever. But the people that say that they weren't religious extremists, you're kind of losing the forest for the trees here. It's like, for example, a stripper in Florida claimed to have, quote-unquote, dated Muhammad Atta, the most famous of all the hijackers, during his time in Florida when he was training to be a pilot, saying that he was a drunk cokehead who just loved nothing more than to fuck day and night.
And she was just like, I was fucking one of them Browns last week, and it must have been one of them 9/11 hijackers. You could tell he was suspicious in the way he was, and he was always sticking his arms out and making plain noises.
He told me I was the tower.
I mean, it may be true that he was fucking around, that he was, going to Vegas, that they were all going to Vegas. All that might very possibly be true. But the only problem with this witness, though, this stripper, who a lot of conspiracy theorists cite, is that she, when pressed further, said that the guy that she was fucking was over 6 feet tall. Muhammad Atta was 5'7". And when this stripper finally produced a photograph, turns out she was just fucking some Middle Eastern dude in Florida, and then decided after he just completely disappeared from her life, he must be the worst terrorist in the history of the fucking United States.
And I don't
now that I think about it, he was Italian and his name was Brian.
Yeah. And I don't want to discredit strippers. There's a lot of honest strippers out there. The other day I was at Pumps, a great strip club in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and a woman said, "Oh, aren't you attractive, handsome?"
So honest.
She called me handsome, so I knew she was telling the truth. Yeah.
So sweet. Absolutely. Because she was like, because my problem is I knew that once he get a taste of my sweet gulch, there ain't no way he's going to want to bring down America.
Yeah, she did refer to her vagina as a sweet gulch. Yeah, that's true, Edward. Were you there, or no? Were you the stripper? Oh my.
Well, let's move away from strippers right now and move to hard court documents. Because if you'll remember, the hijackers were trained at a flight school in Sarasota, Florida. And in January of just this year, a federal judge started reviewing 80,000 pages of documents that relate to a prominent Saudi Arabian family who lived in Sarasota, who had extensive contacts with 3 of the hijackers while they attended flight school. In fact, a few days before the attacks, the family left the country with dinner on the table and a brand new PT Cruiser in the driveway.
Wow.
As Bob Graham said, as though they'd been tipped something was going to happen and they'd better not be in the country when it did.
I'll give Clinton and Hillary and even Donald Trump some leeway when it comes to like Jeffrey Epstein being a pedophile. The man knew a lot of people, right? Yeah. For one family to know 3 out of the 15 Saudi hijackers, that just doesn't seem like a spurious relationship. That seems like they had to kind of know what was going on. And then also, I love Middle Eastern culture and I love Middle Eastern food. You don't leave dinner on the table.
And you know what it is, too? There's nothing a Middle Eastern family loves more than a brand spanking new PT Cruiser. And there ain't no way they're leaving that behind.
No.
I am going to say this in terms of conspiratorial thought. The thing that does still reek to high heaven is the skills level of the hijackers when it comes to piloting the planes, the 757s.
I will admit that is the only thing I cannot figure out or explain. Everything else I have some sort of answer to. This I have none.
They were called piss-poor student pilots. They did not pay attention in class. Hani Hanjour, the guy who made what was then coined an almost professional-level turnaround in a 757 in order to land it dead in the middle of a wall on the side of the Pentagon, right? It's this crazy maneuver he did. This huge turn going 500 miles an hour, and then he was 30 feet above the ground. It's incredibly difficult to do.
Well, the huge turn was he was first headed right towards a section of the building that housed all of the top brass in the Pentagon, and that's why he made the crazy turn and came back around and crashed into the Pentagon.
I mean,
and a month before, he was said that he was not allowed to fly solo in his flight class because his skill level was not ready for him to fly alone.
Well, haven't you watched any good 80s sports movies montages? You can learn a lot in a month. Look at the Bad News Bears, Major League. Yeah, exactly. They listen to some inspirational 80s movies, put on music, put on some high socks. You can learn anything.
It was like the fat kids at camp who somehow beat the athletic kids in the fucking serpentine race with the eggs on the spoon.
Absolutely.
But what we have here, right, is that so certain things that came out about, like, specifically Flight 77 when it was landing in the Pentagon, people specifically were looking out and they saw the plane coming and they're like, oh, good, that's our backup. That is a plane being flown by a professional pilot. That is a military pilot.
Well,
Then coincidentally landed into the side of the Pentagon that was being completely rejiggered to be
renovated. Just renovated.
Rejiggered that is completely acceptable.
All right.
Dog meat says okay.
Okay.
Thank you, dog meat. But it's basically, it was made to withstand either a missile attack or a plane colliding into it. It was completely, the whole wing was completely evacuated. That's why only 125 people died, which is sad to even say that number only. There were many things about the site of the crash that are really specifically very suspicious, and it's that whole storyline is very.
All of that. I mean, I can honestly say the flight plan is the only thing that is not really explainable there. All of the rest of it is completely explainable. It is, why would they, if they were going for maximum damage, why would they hit the only reinforced part of the Pentagon?
Well, that's the whole thing. They actually they went 2 for 4.
Yeah.
And these things happen. Randy Johnson hit a bird with the baseball. It's like David Tyree made one of the most amazing catches in sports history. Nobody thought. I mean, they went 2 for 4, and you can definitely tell when the first plane hit, it is like going all over the place.
Yeah.
It didn't like hit like dead on. He was just like, oh my God, please, I hope I hit something.
All right. So now we've got the Saudis. We've established what is going on with them. We've established that they have a side to this. Like, there is people within the Saudi government and people and Saudi Arabian citizens that are very heavily invested on Team Hijack. Now then there's team government. There's team corporation. There is the other side to this. And who is the leader of the side on American soil? Mr. Dick Cheney.
Also, he's known as the fucking Penguin. Literally the most visibly evil of any leader we've ever had. Anybody who can't make a full smile should not be in public office.
Also,
he shouldn't be in public office.
If you watch interviews with him, watch when he does smile.
Yeah.
Like, people will literally be like, so 3,000 people on 9/11 died. It's always at these very morbid moments where he gives that little smirk, which I think is a tell that he's going to say something that's untrue.
Yeah, he's also just constantly biting on a leather strap
Gotcha.
to keep from fucking snapping at people, like literally biting people's noses off.
Oh, the S&M sex of Dick Cheney. Can you imagine?
So Dick Cheney, in case you're too young to remember, he was the vice president under George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009 and had been present in the White House in one aspect or another since the Nixon administration. He was Gerald Ford's chief of staff when he was, 33, 32?
32, I believe.
He was the youngest chief of staff in history. And you got to think, the chief of staff, that's the man in charge of the White House, pretty much.
Now, with this sort of influence over decades, this man has watched the political climate and sort of international climate of America and the world change for a long time. He's got a lot of involvement in where our country's going. He's been listening to presidents talk about the future of America for 60 years
and really give advice to them. He also was there before and he was there after Trilateral Commission and before really government became lesser than corporations.
Yeah, he really was. And he also imagine the connections he made in that time.
Oh, it's crazy.
I mean, just like the favors that he garnered during that time.
Just watch some document. There's one called The World According to Dick Cheney, which is amazing. You don't get that high position at such a young age in government without being totally, he's a megalomaniac and people hate him.
Yeah.
He's a real scumbag. He would use everything against people. I mean, unbelievably terrible person.
I mean, the line that I find to be most indicative of who he is from that documentary when he says, "It's more important to be successful than to be loved."
Oh, but exactly. He says it with that. He's got the wet lip thing going on. It's everything that's disgusting. He looks like he's slamming sardines and constantly, not salty enough.
So after being a part of Gerald Ford's staff, he spent 12 years as a senator from Wyoming. And then in 1989, he became George H.W. Bush's defense secretary. And for those of you who are versed in the history of the early 90s, you'll know that the first Bush presidency was also the first Gulf War, of which Dick Cheney was a very large part of as defense secretary. Now,
and he was heavily lauded for how efficient a job he did in the first Gulf War.
And he was actually reasonable about it. About the first Gulf War, this was from a C-SPAN interview he did in '94 after he had been out of office. They asked him, and this is also a question I think a lot of people asked when we went into Iraq the second time, why didn't you go into Baghdad? Why didn't you go after Saddam? Why didn't you take him out the first time we were there? And what Dick Cheney said, he said it would be vastly expensive, it would create a civil war, and there would be no exit strategy, which is exactly what happened when we went in the second time and is still happening today.
And what is very interesting, too, is that we're going to see what also makes Dick Cheney, fucking Rick Cheney, one of the worst villains of modern U.S. history is his sheer adaptability. That was the right for the time. It wasn't until he got the infrastructure, until he built up the power of the president later on down the line, that he can then really switch to being full hawk and being like, now we're going to carry this into the future.
Well, he was definitely always a full hawk, but keep in mind, and this is also the time in the early '90s. The U.S. and Saddam Hussein, we weren't enemies at all. Really, Rumsfeld had met with Saddam. We didn't mind that we helped put him in power, and we were looking for a new enemy. We had the forever war going on with the Cold War. Obviously, we fought that in Vietnam, and people were terrified. Russia's pretty much gone at this point. We need to figure out a new enemy, and the war on terrorism wasn't coined yet. Yeah. So there was no option. And Saddam was the only stabilizing force in that region, and we didn't realize how much money we could make quite yet by completely destabilizing it.
Yeah, and speaking to that point right there, in 1997, between the Bush presidencies, the Project for the New American Century was founded, which the Project for the New American Century was a Washington think tank that included 10 future Bush administration officials, including Dick Cheney and Bush's Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. One passage suggested that the transformation of American armed forces through, quote, new technologies and operational concepts, those things that cost a lot of money to make and to spell. Mm-hmm. Yes, he said they said that transition was likely to be a long one, quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor.
But very similar to what FDR did, like you mentioned, with Pearl Harbor. And then as soon as we had the perfect piggyback to end World War II, the using of the bomb was the perfect piggyback to be like, let's just continue this going.
Yeah,
it was awesome.
I mean, I don't know if like World War II necessarily was as malicious as this.
No, but the using of the bomb then led us to be like, where's our new enemy? We constantly need an enemy. I mean, this is all nations are.
Which is also what Eisenhower warned against after World War II, the entire military-industrial complex. Like all of this stuff, it's like we just learn how much money we can make. They learn how much money you can launder, putting it into black ops, into secret government programs, and in military technology. You can just put money around all over the place, which is the basis for what we believe is the secret government. I mean, this is just one of those things that's like the secret government kind of showing its face, the Project for the New American Century.
And that's one of the great ironies of Eisenhower. He saw war. He was a huge military man, and he was the only one who actually went to battle and was like, we cannot do this.
Yeah.
All these other elitist, rich pieces of shit are so happy with war because they like to watch it on TV from a bunker.
Yeah.
They never had to go fight one.
Exactly.
And it's a great cover for money laundering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's huge. So in the year 2000, George W. Bush wins the nomination to run for president on the Republican ticket. He asks Dick Cheney to be his vice president. Cheney, who in the 8 years between the Bush presidencies had become CEO of Halliburton Oil. First time he refuses. He says, I'm not going to do it. Gerald Ford said it was the worst 6 years of his life. But I'll find someone for you. As a
I like
favor,
watching penguins being covered in slick oil. Watching them dance their final dance of death makes me giggle and laugh. I just love the feeling of being alive then, knowing I won. I beat the all of the Pelicans.
So I'm a good judge of character. I'll go find the VP for you.
So Cheney, he says that he looks around. He says that he sees he goes through a bunch of people like, no.
He literally just like lifts up two hats like in his room, going like, no, don't see a vice president under there. Let's see if it's in the junk drawer. Don't see a vice president under there.
But this is the exact same thing that dudes do oftentimes with girls that they're in love with, but they pretend to be okay with the friend zone. They're like, it's okay, Becky, we're gonna find you a good guy. You're like, oh, I think that guy's kind of a dickhead, huh? What a chode over there. And then 2 years later, he's like, but what about me? And then of course she says no.
Of course.
But W wasn't so smart.
So Cheney, he looks around. He says, there's no worthy candidate for this job except me. I'm the only one that's going to be able to do this. Yeah, I know I said the first time that I'm not going to do it, but now that I look around, I see that there's nobody else that's possibly qualified. Nobody else in America.
What a gift. Thank you so much, Dick. What a great gift you've given me.
He also required one of the most stringent testing policies for any vice president, like any vice president candidate ever before.
Yeah, vetting.
Huge financial summaries he was making them give, years of health reviews and all this shit. And what's so weird is that when Cheney chose himself to be vice president, he didn't have to give any of that financial or health information. And the fact he'd already had 3 heart attacks.
Right.
We couldn't get him? Like, he couldn't have died on one of those?
So Dick Cheney, he gives up a salary of $4.7 million a year as CEO at Halliburton. Now, let me ask you, how much money did Cheney get from Halliburton to quit his job as CEO and run for vice president of the United States?
Right, 0. He quit. There's no way you're going to give him money, right?
When I quit Taco Bell, they didn't give me any more tacos for free.
Dick Cheney received from Halliburton, this is in his financial disclosure to the White House. This is not rumor. This is not hearsay. This is fact. $34 million.
Now, is that enough to buy a president?
In 2000.
Yes.
And let me go ahead and tell you right now that Halliburton Oil, little bit of a spoiler alert for you, they were the oil company that received a $1 billion no-bid contract from the government after the Iraq war. Now, I don't know about you.
No way.
I don't know about you, but a fucking $34 million investment with a $1 billion return is a pretty fucking good deal.
That's why I play the slots in Atlantic City. You put in $5, you can take out $25 on occasion.
Have you ever played that scratch-off poker night? You get 3 piggies in a row, you can win up to $1,000.
Yeah.
That costs 75 cents.
Love poker night.
So as vice president, Dick Cheney enjoyed powers unprecedented in the history of the office. He was present at all important meetings.
And so also was very interesting because if you remember in the year 2000 during the transition during that whole election debacle, while everyone was spreading and lawyers were fighting about the recount to see who won the presidency, Dick Cheney was already in the office organizing the entire government. He took over the entire transition of the government, which no vice president has ever done. He made all the calls. He put all of the cabinet members in place. Well, it was the whole government was literally created by Dick Cheney. It's supervillain level. It's like literally he got his hands so deep inside the government so that he can make any move he wanted.
And that all goes back to the Supreme Court justices that were chosen. Rehnquist under Reagan, Clarence Thomas. It was a 5-4 straight decision. The Supreme Court says the justices, supposedly non-political, literally decided who the presidency of the United States would go to.
Yeah, it was despicable.
It was crazy.
We can't get into it. I thought about maybe getting into the 2000 election a little bit, but if you don't know anything about it, just go see.
We'll do some top hat about it.
We'll do a top hat about it, but yeah, just go see when democracy died. Like when we lost, because that's when it happened.
Right.
It's just important to know that stuff like this, right, are reasons why the conspiracy thought may really be true. Dick Cheney really was a puppet master. He really had a lot of influence in the government. A lot of what he said went. He got to know. They were saying the thing about him is because he could go in all those meetings, he could formulate policy as it worked its way up to the president. He was very manipulative and very smart. was gunning for, if he wanted something, he was going to do whatever it takes to get it.
Mm-hmm. And, W did not want him to be the vice president. Dick Cheney actually said that he would resign. Rumsfeld was the exact same way, but W thought it would lose him the election if he went into the second term without having Dick Cheney because it would look unstable.
Wow.
And they didn't speak that entire 4 years. They hate each other. They've just recently, I think they just had one conversation in the past 2 years.
What, do they get together for brunch?
They hate each other.
Yeah.
They despise each other.
I hate French toast. It's for gays.
Yeah. W thinks Dick Cheney ruined his presidency.
Well,
and he did. So.
He absolutely did.
Because Dick Cheney also, because that was the time too, because Bush finally stood up and shut down the warrantless phones after 9/11 happened, when he had his whole warrantless phone tapping thing. Bush just didn't know. And Cheney was manipulating everything around him, letting him get the documents whenever he was going to get the documents, and literally Bush was like, "What's happening?" That's my Bush impression.
Too bad that's Bob Dylan. It's Bob Dylan.
I don't believe that. No, sir. No. Again, no. You got to make it legal. You got to make it legal.
Right. Well, that's the thing. They don't give presidents, oftentimes they don't give them a lot of information, so then they can deny and do it with, they could pass a lie detector test.
Plausible deniability.
Right, plausible deniability.
That's what it's all about. The whole, what is that? When did you know, and what did you know, and when did you know it?
Right.
Like that's all of that is designed to, I mean, it's pretty much Nixon-proofing everything.
Yeah, which is why fucking Barack Obama doesn't technically know anything about the GATA treaty, or how the amount of work we're doing with the Greys right now in order to make hologram things to make so that fucking Jennifer Aniston can show up in your living room. Because he doesn't know, and that's why he can belittle the alien movement as much as he likes.
So on August 6th of 2001, a report, the famous report that we've all heard of, bin Laden determined to strike U.S., is read during a CIA briefing to the president, of which Dick Cheney, of course, was president. Among explicit threats to Washington, D.C., allusions to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and reports that al-Qaeda members were living or traveling in the U.S. for years. The report also explicitly mentions passenger airlines being used in terrorist attacks. Again, this is true and verifiable, not rumor or conjecture.
And then what they say too, right, a part of the reason why 9/11 happened is because they believed there was this concept called failure of imagination. That's what the 9/11 Commission came forward and said. Failure of imagination. They never thought that they were going to fly planes into buildings. They never had prepared for them to fly planes into buildings. But that is jack shit, totally wrong.
Yes.
There is a thing called Amalgam Virgo, which is a part of a training program, and was basically because of this whole thing was Vigilant Guardian, all the things that happened on 9/11, the big massive weird military tests that were happening. They specifically were looking for people hijacking planes and using them as weapons, right, with a fucking picture of Osama bin Laden on the front of the memo, and it's insane. It's just you fucking assholes. Well, they knew about the whole goddamn time. Yeah, maybe they didn't know the goddamn day, but as soon as the shit started going down, where was Rummy? You know what I mean? It was goddamn Rummy.
He was taking.
Tell me, I haven't been drinking for days and yelling at the fish in here.
Maybe he was taking a dump. Who knows?
And by the way, Henry, I've been sober for days because I've had to be. I've had to be sober to get all this shit, and that's even harder.
Right. But one of the funny things is the government says these things to try to wash their hands of it. But I'm of the mind where I think it's almost more terrifying when they're like, "Oh, never thought of that." Of course they thought of that. Naturally, they thought of that. Everybody, as soon as the first building that was over 2 stories was ever created in the history of time, someone was like, "What if I run into the top of it?" Of course they thought of it. It's scarier to think that they didn't.
Yeah,
and to believe that they didn't.
In the 1880s, and those weird plane bikes crashed into pharmacies.
I'm sure. Thank God, I got the medicine right here.
And some people say you know what? Nothing was done about this. There was, in fact, and this is from NBC, a directive sitting on George W. Bush's desk 3 days before September 11th that was a plan to wage a war against specifically al-Qaeda. And it said that the invasion of Afghanistan happened so quickly because the plans only needed to be pulled off the shelf. Nothing needed to be drawn up. Nothing needed to be thought out. It had already been thought out. And it was just waiting to be pulled, and that is from NBC. That is from NBC News, and what I found, of course, in researching this, of course, when we shifted focus, a lot of stuff actually started coming back to my memory from like the angry 2003 to 2006 Iraq War years. A lot
back
of
when your hair was like back past your shoulders and you were wearing a lot of Pantera shirts and screaming about the government.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was way past my shoulders. Yeah, I did not have a civilized conversation with my brother for literally 5 years.
Right.
But all of this stuff started coming back. All of this actually true things. There was so much information being put out after 9/11. There was a lot of good journalism being done, and it is all out there. There's just so much of it,
right?
And so little of it received big attention. And it's not like, mainstream media or anything like that. It's not like it only exists on InfoWars. It exists on the NBC sites. It exists on the New York Times. It's everywhere. It's just on page 8.
Right. And of course,
you've been talking about this too. And George Bush was talking about fucking Saddam Hussein a month after he was inaugurated. There were things put into place for a long time. They were ready to go. They just needed an excuse. They needed a new Pearl Harbor. And what a convenient thing that happened for them.
Yeah, Rumsfeld wanted to get him immediately, Saddam Hussein. Dick Cheney pressed to see if it was Iraq. But I will say, in the defense of the government to some degree, if they really did want to blame it on Iraq, they could have just set it up to be Iraqis in there.
Yeah.
That's why it was so crazy that Iraq was even like we were all so confused at that time and all so full of rage. They could have channeled the patriotism and nationalism in any which direction. We could have, God forbid, really gotten our environmental order. We could have gotten like everyone would have been clean energy for like they would have been on board with anything the government said. But of course, governments take you to war.
Of course. So on the day of the attacks, of course, George Bush is out of town in Florida. Now, his first address to the nation, we all remember, we're going to get those folks that did this heinous act, and it's just amazing that he used the word folks in response to the worst terrorist attack in amazing history. It still just
he wasn't
boils my
supposed
blood.
to deal with this shit. Bush was never supposed to have to deal with it.
Yeah, it was. We said it in the last episode where he said that I never campaigned on being a wartime president.
No, he didn't. He campaigned on education.
Yeah,
and when he says folks, I'm thinking, did an elderly couple swinging on the front stoop and rocking chairs like plan this entire thing? Like folks is. Folks, those Saudi Arabian folks who have jihad in their hearts and want to take down America. Those kind folks.
Yeah, it just cuts to anybody. Folks is anybody who's churning butter. It doesn't matter what they say, but they were definitely churning butter. It was goat butter.
Yeah.
And it was them being like, well, that America's